The banquet hall glowed with the warmth of 1,000 candles, their flickering light dancing across crystal chandeliers and tables draped in ivory linens. Laughter and music swirled through the air, a symphony of joy celebrating my granddaughter Emily's wedding. I sat at the family table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my silver hair pinned elegantly atop my head. At 75, I still carried myself with the grace my mother had instilled in me, though my heart felt heavier than my aging bones. My children, 3 children, David, Margaret, and Claire, had promised to sit with me tonight. They knew how much this moment meant, how much I'd looked forward to sharing in Emily's joy. Yet, as the evening unfolded, their chairs remained empty. I scanned the room, my eyes tracing the crowd. David was by the bar, laughing with a group of strangers, his tie loosened and his glass raised high. Margaret was on the dance floor, twirling with her husband, her face alight with a carefree smile I hadn't seen in years. Claire, my youngest, was nowhere to be seen, likely outside, on her phone, managing some crisis at her law firm, as she always did. I waited, hoping one of them would glance my way, notice their mother sitting alone, her heart sinking with every passing minute. But they didn't. The table was set for 6, but I was the only one there. Emily, radiant in her white gown, had stopped by briefly to kiss my cheek and thank me for the heirloom necklace I'd given her, off family treasure passed down from my own grandmother. "You're the best, Gran," she'd said, her eyes sparkling before she was whisked away by her new husband. I smiled for her, my heart swelling with pride. But as she vanished into the crowd, the emptiness settled in again. My children, the ones I'd raised through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices, had left me here, a solitary figure in a sea of celebration. I tried to dismiss the ache in my chest. Perhaps they were busy, caught up in the moment. Weddings were chaotic, after all. I sipped my water, straightened my shawl, and watched as the first course was served. The waiter, a kind young man with a gentle smile, placed a plate of salad before me. "For you, ma'am," he said softly, his eyes lingering as if he sensed my solitude. I thanked him, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. The salad sat untouched as I waited, still hoping. Hours passed. The main course came and went, the clink of silverware and bursts of laughter filling the room. I caught glimpses of my children, each absorbed in their own world. David, now red-faced from too much wine, was telling a loud story to a group of men. Margaret was at another table, chatting animatedly with Emily's new in-laws. Claire finally reappeared, slipping into a seat far across the room, her phone still in hand. Not one of them looked my way. Not one of them remembered their promise. I thought back to the years I'd given them, the nights I'd stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the mornings I'd driven them to soccer practice, the countless times I'd put their needs above my own. I'd worked 2 jobs after their father left, scraping by to ensure they had everything they needed: college funds, new clothes, a home filled with love. I'd never asked for much in return, only that they stay close, that they remember me as I'd remembered them. But tonight, at this wedding, their absence spoke louder than any words could. The band struck up a slow song, and couples flooded the dance floor. I watched, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched my napkin. I'd always loved dancing, though my hips no longer allowed it. I'd imagined this night differently, children beside me, sharing stories, laughing together as a family. Instead, I was a ghost at their celebration, invisible in the midst of their joy. A young woman, one of Emily's friends, approached my table. "Mrs. Harper, you look beautiful tonight," she said warmly. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Her kindness stung, a reminder of the connection I crave from my own flesh and blood. I smiled, nodding, unwilling to burden her with my truth. "It's a lovely wedding," I replied, my voice soft but steady. She lingered for a moment, then rejoined her friends, leaving me once again to my solitude. As the night wore on, the ache in my heart hardened into something else resolve. I'd spent my life giving, loving, waiting. But waiting had brought me nothing but empty chairs and a cold plate. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small notebook, one I always carried for jotting down thoughts. With a steady hand, I began to write. Not a letter to my children, not a plea for their attention, but something far more permanent. I wrote of my love for them. Yes, but also of my decision, a decision born of this night, of their absence, of the clarity that comes from being left alone. The wedding cake was cut, and cheers erupted. I watched Emily and her husband feed each other, their faces glowing with love. I clapped along with the crowd, my heart full for her, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking of my will, of the legacy I'd planned to leave behind. For years, I'd intended to divide my estate equally among my 3 children. The house, the savings, the family heirlooms, they were to be theirs, a testament to the life we'd built together. But as I sat there, alone at a table meant for 6, I realized something profound. Love cannot be one-sided, and neither can a legacy. I closed my notebook, slipped it back into my purse, and stood. My legs were unsteady, but my heart was firm. I made my way to the coat check, retrieved my shawl, and stepped out into the cool night air. The music faded behind me, replaced by the quiet hum of the city. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I'd made my choice, and it felt right, not out of anger, but out of a quiet, unshakable certainty. My children had left me alone tonight, and in doing so, they'd shown me who they were. Now, it was my turn to decide who I was. The cab ride home was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the driver's radio. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. My heart was still heavy, but there was a strange peace settling over me, like the calm after a storm. I'd spent decades pouring my love into my children, and tonight, their absence had carved a truth into my soul. Love, no matter how deep, cannot thrive on neglect. I leaned back in the seat, my notebook resting in my lap, its pages now holding the weight of my decision. When I reached my small, tidy house, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of lavender and old wood greeted me, a comfort amidst the turmoil. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I lit a single candle and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once helped my children with homework, where we'd shared countless meals and laughter. Now, it was just me, the flicker of the flame casting shadows on the walls. I opened my notebook again and continued writing, my pen moving with purpose. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was clear. My estate wasn't vast, but it was significant. The house, paid off after years of careful budgeting, held memories in every corner. My savings, modest but hard-earned, were the result of decades of sacrifice. The heirlooms, the necklace I'd given Emily, the pocket watch my father had carried, the china my mother had cherished were pieces of our family's history. I'd always imagined passing these down to David, Margaret, and Claire, a way to keep our bond alive long after I was gone. But bonds, I realized, require effort from both sides. As I wrote, I thought of their lives now. David, my eldest, was a successful architect, always chasing the next big project. He'd grown distant over the years, his visits sporadic, his calls brief. Margaret, my middle child, was a mother herself, consumed by her own family and social circles. She'd always been the warmest of the three, but her warmth had faded, replaced by fleeting texts and occasional holiday cards. Claire, my youngest, was a lawyer, brilliant and driven, but her ambition left little room for anyone else. I didn't resent their success, far from it. I was proud, but pride couldn't fill the empty chairs at the wedding. I began to draft a new plan for my will. The house, I decided, would not go to my children. Instead, I would donate it to a local charity that supported elderly widows like women who, too often, found themselves forgotten. The idea brought a flicker of warmth to my chest. The thought of my home, filled with laughter and love once more, even if not by my own family, felt right. My savings would go to Emily, not as a bribe or a reward, but because she'd shown me kindness tonight, however brief. The heirlooms, I decided, would be split, some to Emily, some to the charity, and a few to be auctioned for causes I cared about. The candle burned low as I wrote, my thoughts drifting to the past. I remembered the day David was born, how I'd held him and promised to give him the world. I remembered Margaret's first steps, her tiny hand clutching mine. I remembered Claire's graduation, her face beaming as I pinned a corsage to her gown. Those moments were real, and they were ours. But somewhere along the way, the thread that bound us had frayed. I tried to mend it, with calls they didn't answer, visits they cut short, invitations they declined. Tonight had been the final snip. I paused, my pen hovering over the page. A part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if I should give them another chance. But then I saw myself at that wedding table, surrounded by empty chairs, my heart aching for a glance that never came. No, I thought. This wasn't about punishment. It was about self-respect. I'd given them everything, but I wouldn't beg for their love. The clock struck midnight, and I closed my notebook. I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a weight I'd carried too long. I stood, blew out the candle, and made my way to bed. The house was quiet, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind man who'd handled my affairs for decades. I explained my decision, my voice steady as I outlined the changes to my will. He listened quietly, then asked, "Are you sure, Eleanor? This is a big step." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I've never been more sure," I said. He promised to draft the new documents and have them ready for my review by the end of the week. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Sorry we got caught up last night. Mom, hope you had fun." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. A part of me wanted to respond, to tell her how I'd felt, to ask why she hadn't come to sit with me. But I didn't. Instead, I set the phone down and walked to my garden, where the roses I'd planted years ago were in full bloom. I knelt, my hands in the soil, and felt the earth's quiet strength. I didn't need their apologies. I needed to live for myself now. The days that followed were a quiet revolution. I woke each morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My house, once a shrine to my children's past, became my sanctuary. I began sorting through old photos, letters, and mementos, not with nostalgia, but with clarity. Some I kept, others I donated, and a few I set aside for Emily. Each decision felt like a step toward reclaiming myself, not as a mother who'd been left behind, but as Eleanor Harper, a woman with her own story to tell. I started volunteering at the local community center, a place I'd passed countless times but never entered. There, I met women like Muadow's, mothers, grandmothers whose lives had been shaped by giving, only to find themselves alone in their later years. We shared stories over cups of tea, our laughter and tears weaving a tapestry of resilience. I found solace in their company, in the way they understood the ache of being forgotten without needing to explain it. They became my new family, not by blood, but by shared experience. One afternoon, as I helped organize a book drive, a woman named Ruth pulled me aside. She was 80, with a sharp wit and eyes that sparkled with mischief. "You've got a fire in you, Eleanor," she said, her voice low but firm. "I saw it the moment you walked in here. Don't let it go out." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I'd let my light dim, waiting for my children to reignite it. But Ruth was right, I had my own fire, and it was time to let it burn. I began to write again, not just notes in my notebook, but stories. I wrote about my childhood, my dreams, the moments that had shaped me. I wrote about the wedding, not with bitterness, but with honesty, capturing the pain and the strength it had awakened in me. The words flowed easily, each one a step toward healing. I shared my writing with the women at the center, and their encouragement fueled me further. "You should publish these," Ruth said one day, her eyes gleaming. I laughed, brushing it off, but the idea took root. Meanwhile, my children began to notice my absence. David called one evening, his voice tinged with confusion. "Mom, you haven't been answering my texts. Everything okay?" I heard the concern, but it felt hollow after months of silence on his end. "I'm fine, David," I said calmly. "Just busy living my life." He hesitated, then changed the subject, talking about his latest project. I listened, but I didn't press. I didn't ask why he hadn't visited, why he hadn't kept his promise at the wedding. I was done chasing. Margaret stopped by unannounced one afternoon, her arms full of grocery bags. "I thought you might need some things, Mom," she said, her smile bright but nervous. I thanked her, invited her in, but our conversation was strained. She talked about her kids, her husband, her busy schedule, but she didn't ask about Minute really. When she left, I felt a pang of sadness, but it was fleeting. I'd spent too long waiting for her to see me. Claire was the last to reach out. Her email formal and brief. "Mom, I've been swamped at work, but I'd love to catch up soon. Let me know when you're free." I read it twice, searching for the warmth I'd once known in her words. It wasn't there. I replied politely, suggesting a coffee date, but I didn't hold my breath. I'd learned that their promises were as fleeting as the wind. By the time Mr. Thompson sent the draft of my new will, I was ready. I met him at his office, a small space filled with leather-bound books and the scent of coffee. He slid the document across his desk, his eyes kind but searching. "Eleanor, I've included everything you asked for," he said. "The house to the charity, the savings to Emily, the heirlooms divided as you specified. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to exclude your children entirely?" I nodded, my resolve unshaken. They've made their choices, and I've made mine. He didn't press further. We reviewed the details, and I signed the papers, my hand steady. As I left his office, I felt a weight lift, not guilt, but the burden of expectation. I'd spent my life hoping my children would return the love I'd given them. Now, I was free to give that love elsewhere, myself, to the women at the community center, to the causes that mattered to me. That evening, I sat in my garden, the roses glowing in the twilight. I thought of the wedding, of the empty chairs, of the notebook that had changed everything. I wasn't erasing my children from my life, but I was rewriting my story. And for the first time in years, it felt like mine. The seasons changed, and so did I. Fall painted the trees in shades of amber and crimson, and I found myself embracing the crisp air, the way it sharpened my senses. My days were filled with purpose, volunteering, writing, and tending to my garden. The community center had become my second home, a place where I was seen, valued, not for what I'd given, but for who I was. The women there, Ruth especially, had a way of pulling me out of my head and into the moment. We laughed over shared meals, planned events, and swapped stories that reminded me I wasn't alone in my journey. One morning, as I was pruning my roses, Emily called. Her voice was bright, full of the energy only a newlywed could have. "Gran, I was thinking about you," she said. "Can I come over this weekend? I'd love to hear more about that necklace you gave me." My heart warmed at her words. Unlike her parents, Emily had always made time for me, even if it was just a quick call or a visit between her busy days. I agreed, and when she arrived, we spent the afternoon in my living room, sipping tea and talking about the past. I told her about her great-grandmother, the woman who'd first worn the necklace, a fierce spirit who'd survived 2 wars and raised 4 children on her own. Emily listened, her eyes wide, her hands tracing the necklace she now wore. "I had no idea, Gran," she said softly. "You've always been so strong." Her words touched me, but they also reminded me of the strength I'd rediscovered in myself. I didn't tell her about the will, about the decision I'd made. That was for later, when the time was right. As Emily left, she hugged me tightly, promising to visit again soon. I watched her drive away, my heart full but tinged with a quiet sadness. She was the exception, the one who hadn't forgotten me. But even her love couldn't erase the absence of my children. I returned to my notebook, writing about that day, about the joy of connection and the ache of what was missing. My stories were growing into something more, a collection, perhaps even a book. Ruth's words echoed in my mind. "You should publish these." I wasn't ready yet, but the thought no longer felt impossible. A few weeks later, David showed up at my door. It was a Sunday morning, and I was surprised to see him, his coat dusted with early snow. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I invited him in, poured us both coffee, and waited. He sat across from me, fidgeting, his usual confidence replaced by something uneasy. "I know we haven't been around much," he started, his eyes avoiding mine. "The wedding, it was a crazy night. I didn't mean to leave you alone." I listened, my face calm, but my heart guarded. His words were an apology, but they felt rehearsed, as if he'd sensed a shift in me and was scrambling to understand it. "David," I said gently, "I waited for you. For all of you. But you weren't there." He opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. "I'm not angry. I've just made some changes. That's all." He frowned, confused, but I didn't elaborate. The will was my decision, and I wasn't ready to share it, not yet. He left after an hour, promising to visit more often. I nodded, smiled, but I didn't hold my breath. I'd heard those promises before. As the door closed behind him, I felt a mix of emotions: love for the boy he'd been, sorrow for the distance between us, and a quiet pride in my own strength. I wasn't living for his approval anymore. Christmas approached, and with it came the usual flurry of invitations. Margaret invited me to her house for dinner, a grand affair with her extended family. Claire suggested I join her in the city for a holiday party. David sent a text, vague but hopeful, about stopping by. I declined them all, choosing instead to host a small gathering at the community center. Ruth and the others helped me decorate, stringing lights and setting out homemade cookies. We sang carols, shared stories, and laughed until our sides ached. It was the warmest Christmas I'd had in years. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about my children. I didn't hate them, far from it. I loved them deeply. But love didn't mean accepting neglect. I'd given them my heart for decades. And now I was giving it to myself. To the people who saw me. To the life I was building. My notebook lay on my nightstand. Its pages nearly full. I reached for it, adding a few lines about the day. About the joy of chosen family. The words felt like a promise to keep going. To keep writing. To keep living. Spring arrived, bringing with it a renewal I felt in my bones. My garden burst into color, and I spent hours tending to it. My hands in the soil, my mind at peace. The community center had become a hub of activity, and I was at its heart, organizing events, teaching writing workshops, and even starting a small book club. My stories had grown into a manuscript, rough but heartfelt. And Ruth was relentless in her encouragement. "You're telling our story, Eleanor," she said one day, her voice fierce. "Don't stop now." I didn't. I wrote every day, pouring my life onto the page, the joys, the sorrows, the lessons learned in the quiet moments. I wrote about the wedding, about the empty chairs, about the strength I'd found in letting go. The process was cathartic, a way to make sense of the years I'd spent waiting for my children to return to me. I sent the manuscript to a small publisher, more out of curiosity than expectation. To my surprise, they responded, asking for revisions but expressing interest. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. My children, meanwhile, continued their tentative efforts to reconnect. Margaret called more often, her voice warmer, though still distracted. Claire visited once, bringing flowers and an apology for her absence. David sent a long email, reminiscing about our old family vacations, promising to make time for me. I appreciated their efforts, but I no longer hung my happiness on their promises. I welcomed their calls, their visits, but I didn't need them to feel whole. One afternoon, Emily came by with news she was pregnant. Her face glowed as she shared her excitement, and I felt a surge of joy for her. We sat in my garden, the roses in full bloom, and talked about the future. "I want my baby to know you, Gran," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. "You're so strong, so wise." Her words brought tears to my eyes. Not because they validated me, but because they reminded me of the legacy I still had to share, not just with her, but with the world. I decided it was time to tell my children about the will. I invited them to my house, a rare gathering. They arrived together, a sight that stirred old memories of their childhood, when they'd tumble through the door, full of laughter and chaos. Now, they were adults, their faces lined with the weight of their own lives. I served tea, and we sat in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken questions. "I've changed my will," I said, my voice calm but firm. Their eyes widened, but I continued before they could interrupt. "The house, the savings, the heirlooms, theory not going to you. The house will go to a charity for widows. The savings to Emily. The heirlooms are split. Some to her, some to causes I care about." I paused, letting the words sink in. This isn't about punishment. It's about what feels right to me now. David's face reddened. "Mom, that's extreme. We've been busy. Sure, but we love you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and Claire stared at the floor, her jaw tight. I understood their shock, their hurt, but I didn't waver. "I know you love me," I said, "but love is more than words. It's being there. And you weren't not when I needed you." The room was silent. Margaret reached for my hand, but I gently pulled away. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said, You're welcome here. Always. But my legacy, my choices they remind to make. They left soon after. Their faces a mix of anger and confusion. I didn't try to stop them. I'd said what I needed to say. That night, I sat in my garden, the stars bright above me. I felt no regret, only a quiet certainty. I'd spent my life giving, and now I was giving to myself, to the people who saw me, to the causes that mattered. My manuscript was accepted for publication a week later, a small but meaningful triumph. I dedicated it to the women at the community center, to the strength we'd found in each other. The book launch was a quiet affair, held at the community center with Ruth and the others by my side. My manuscript, now a slim volume titled Empty Chairs, Full Heart, was a collection of stories about love, loss, and the strength to move forward. The room was filled with familiar faces, women from the center, a few neighbors, and, to my surprise, Emily, who'd driven in with her husband. She hugged me tightly, her eyes shining. "I'm so proud of you, Gran," she whispered. I smiled, my heart full. My children didn't come. I'd sent them invitations, but I hadn't expected them to show. David had called the day before, his voice strained, asking if we could talk again about the will. I declined gently, telling him I was at peace with my decision. Margaret had sent a card, congratulating me but citing a scheduling conflict. Claire hadn't responded at all. Their absence stung, but it no longer defined me. I'd found my own light, and it was enough. The launch was a celebration of more than just the book. It was a testament to the life I'd built, to the community that had embraced me, to the woman I'd become. Ruth gave a toast, her voice cracking with emotion as she spoke of my courage. I looked around the room, at the faces of women who'd walked paths like mine, and felt a deep gratitude. We were survivors, not because we'd endured, but because we'd chosen to thrive. As the evening wound down, I stepped outside, the cool air brushing my skin. I thought of the wedding, of that lonely table, of the moment I decided to rewrite my story. It hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. My children might never understand, but that was okay. I wasn't living for their approval anymore. I was living for myself, for the women who'd become my family, for the readers who might find solace in my words. Emily's baby was born a few months later, a healthy girl named Lily. I visited them in the hospital, holding the tiny bundle in my arms, my heart swelling with love. Emily asked me to be Lily's godmother, and I accepted, tears in my eyes. I knew I'd be there for her, just as I'd been for Emily, not out of obligation, but out of joy. The charity took ownership of my house a year later, after I'd moved into a small apartment near the community center. It was a bittersweet day, but as I handed over the keys, I felt a sense of completion. The house would live on, filled with new stories, new laughter, new love. My savings helped Emily buy a home for her growing family, and the heirlooms found new homes, some with her, some with causes that carried my values forward. I still heard from my children occasionally. David sent a Christmas card. Margaret called on my birthday, and Claire emailed now and then. I responded with kindness, but I no longer waited for them. My life was full of writing, of friends, of purpose. My book sold modestly, but the letters I received from readers, women who'd felt seen in my words, were worth more than any bestseller list. As I sat in my new apartment, my notebook open before me, I wrote one final entry. It wasn't about the wedding or the will or the pain of being left behind. It was about the woman I'd become, strong, whole, and unafraid to live for herself. I closed the notebook, a smile on my lips. The chairs at that wedding table might have been empty, but my heart was full, and that was enough.